Hi, it's great to be here, and I'd like to thank the National Parents Council for inviting us here today. I'm with Inclusion Ireland. For those of you who don't know, we're a relatively small enough organisation, but we're a national association for people with intellectual disabilities. Kind of take a human rights view to our work in that, we view however we take on any advocacy work through the lens of the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. And we'd have a very, we'd be very rooted in the fact that, we believe that people with disabilities belong in the community, partaking like everybody else in society, and the appropriate supports are put in place for that. And it's actually, I suppose, it's one of the good things in the education system in recent years that, the research will back it up, that there's a lot of young people are going to mainstream schools. Anyway, so I'll go on ahead. I suppose before I start, we did a report and we looked at seclusion and restraint. That's the cover of it there. The main piece of it was formed by the voices of 14 parents who relayed their stories to us in Inclusion Ireland. That's it. It's not peer-reviewed research. It's a discussion paper, and we believe it's done what it's meant to do. It really has created a discussion amongst policymakers and all that in how children have been supported around this kind of stuff. On a health warning, I'd always say to people when, in terms of this, like, we're an advocacy organisation, people generally come to us when something bad has happened. So we kind of, sometimes we sound like the prophets of doom, so we do. But it's always worth noting that the vast majority of schools are really good places, and they're staffed by really, really good people whose sole goal in life is the education of the young people that come in the door. Anyway, look, this piece here, it was something that came about over a long period of time, and I'd rewind the clock about 4 years to literally somebody just rang up Inclusion Ireland. It was actually a query originally about July provision, but then it rumbled on and we sorted out the July provision thing, and then she said, I want to ask you a question. He says, my child is being restrained in a prone position. Never heard of a prone position. But anyway, it's when somebody's restrained face down on the floor. And she said, well, that doesn't sound right, but how often is it happening? And she said, well, it could be 10 times some days, but averaging around 30, 40 times a month. And so I was quite taken aback by this. And, we took it on as an advocacy case and went along. And about the same time, another case came in as well. So we were kind of dealing with these two cases on an advocacy perspective. And just as we were doing that, I noticed in the media as well, there was a young child, and there was reports of this young man he was being locked in a room for up to 5 hours a day in a school, So there was these kind of things that happened, and we went on with the advocacy cases, and I'll be honest and say we had a dismal outcome in that we didn't have a very successful outcome to either case. So fast forward on about a year, and we had two families contact us, and their children were I suppose how to describe those, they've been locked into a padded room in the school. We took them on as advocacy cases again, and the parents then were relaying to us that they told the school to put a stop to this, and then the school had no other way of managing behaviour, so the phone started ringing at 9:15 to come and collect the child, and all of that kind of stuff. Again, not overly successful on the advocacy front, because these are quite tricky. They're quite tricky cases to deal with. Now, forward another year, and within the space of about 6 months, we had about 4 or 5 calls. So as an organisation, we decided to do, well, hang on, we need to sit down and do a review. So we all came together as a team, and we kind of realised that we'd had about 10 cases of seclusion and or restraint, or a combination of both. So we said, look, we as an organisation need to perhaps go somewhere with this and do something. So we kind of, we reached out to the parents who had contacted us in the past, and we said, look, we're going to host a meeting in our offices, and you're welcome to come along or not. And we don't know if you want to do anything about it, but if you do, we'll explore any avenues. Now, everybody actually came along, and a few others. Now, the common theme, and I know as parents you might think, God, I'd go in and I'd throttle that staff member or whatever, but there was kind of like a realisation among the parents before they came anywhere near us, that this was more of a systemic piece. You know, there was something systemically wrong. And, you know, there was a lot of frustration about how, you know, through various complaints mechanisms and, you know, avenues that explored, there seemed to be no kind of redress or satisfaction in how their cases had, you know, how they'd been resolved, or in most cases not resolved. So we're lucky enough in Inclusion Ireland in that we can access, there is a scheme where we can access free legal services. You know, you need to be lucky for a volunteer solicitor or barrister to come along to it. But we were lucky enough in that a children's rights solicitor agreed to come and do a workshop with the parents. And at the end of it, he was recommending, look, he says, what you really need to do is pull together the cases into some sort of a document and use it as an advocacy tool to, you know, to try and elicit change within the system. Because, you know, the individual options all seem to be quite tricky in how to go about it. I suppose I should just go back as well, like in terms of the restrictive practices we were talking about, just to be very clear, you know, because it can be a little wishy-washy by times in that, you know, there's a quiet room, or, you know, I think the department's only real advice around this is it's actually in a guidance document on the building of schools, and they talk about young people going off to self-regulate and all that. That's fine and that happens, but, you know, what we're talking about here is, you know, the Mental Health Commission would define seclusion as the placing or leaving of a person in a room alone at any time with the exit door locked or blocked by some fashion. And the Department of Health would say that restraint is the use of practices for non-therapeutic purposes that result in the intentional restriction of a person's movement. So these were the kind of two practices we were talking about, not somebody going off to self-regulate. We also believe that the 14 stories in the paper were the thin edge end of the wedge. And sorry, just that was actually some of the parents in the schools that taken these photos. These were two of the rooms that we used. They're not pleasant places, and you can actually see the one on the right-hand side of both of them. You'll notice on it that there's no handles or anything on the inside of the door. But we believe the 14 stories were the thin edge end of the wedge. You know, the parents that shared their stories, they would have told us that there are many other parents within the school. Like, you know, they talk at the school gate, they have conversations with each other. But the 14 families in this one, you know, all of the children kind of, well, sorry, not all of them, but a significant amount of them ended up moving school, going in short school days, expulsion, that kind of thing. So others that are witnessing this, to see it, and, you know, they're quite frightened to speak out. You know, and like, just give you an example, like one of the children was expelled from a school because the mother wouldn't allow the continued use of a prone restraint procedure, something that was happening, you know, numerous times a day, many times in a month. You know, when we say, you know, the parent has options, you know, she went through the school complaint system, the Office of the Children's Ombudsman were out to the school, NEPs were out at the school, the NCSE, although it's not within their remit, were out at the school. The Minister of Education was aware of the situation, but, you know, it didn't have a good resolution. But, you know, the other parents in the school see what's happening, and, you know, they're kind of, oh God, you know, at least we have a school place. And like that, the parent made a decision, right, that this has to stop, and, you know, a series of actions then went about where the child was expelled from the school. You know, the parent even won a Section 29 appeal, and the school just changed the reason for the expulsion and went ahead about it again. And, you know, the department wouldn't partake in the action that they meant to and enforce the ruling of the committee. That child had a year and a half left in school, and they never passed the school gate again. There were simply no appropriate school places in Dublin anywhere. The mum applied to every school in Dublin. You know, the parents see this, and you know, the other parents in the school see this happening, going, God, well, we better not make too many waves. And in that particular school, when we were at the Section 29 appeal, the chairperson of the committee did ask the chair of the board of management of the school, were there any other children experiencing these practices? And they did indicate there were 6 children. So, you know, it wasn't just a single case. Like 5 of the children in the report, they ended up availing of home tuition for extended periods of time due to the parents objecting to restrictive practices. And, you know, it's fine and dandy having home tuition, but like everybody within this room, I'm sure, knows that the best place for a child to receive their education is in a school, and the single greatest determinant of educational outcomes for any child is a good quality teacher. You know, so when you're on home tuition, you're missing out on all of that. You're missing out on the social aspects and all of that kind of stuff. So we're saying these are the organisations that were alerted by the parents who, you know, that are within our report. Like, I remember seeing a NEPS report. They said they were extremely concerned about the processes that were happening with a particular child. It's not within their remit to do anything about it. You know, I personally, in one of the advocacy cases, I remember being out at the school a couple of times with a senior SENO. We met with the school around these issues. Child and Family Agency, I suppose, they were one of the most disappointing pieces was that some of the parents would have said, look, we believe there to be a welfare issue here in concerning the child. And I should also point out that, you know, when the previous speaker spoke about some of the challenging behaviour, not all of the children in the report engaged in challenging behaviour. Some of them did. I'd be lying if they said they didn't, but I'd easily say half weren't engaged in any form of challenging behaviour. And, you know, the lack of concern from TUSLA was concerning to us as an organisation.
5 minutes.
Yep. I'd better speed up a little bit. Like, for example, one of the parents would have reported, you know, her son was put in a room for up to 5 hours, 3 days in a row. And he, you know, did report it to TUSLA, and the social worker would have said, look, this is a highly unusual case for us. We mainly deal with individuals and not schools. I'll just move on. I've already, you know, the last speaker already spoke about the NCSE's policy advice. It's going back to 2012. So the department have been sitting on their hands for quite a while. They're aware it's out there. The one on severely emotional behaviour difficulties, that's from 2012 to or 2016 for the autism one, and then 2018 for the SNAs one. We wanted to say, you know, we've already heard that the staff weren't trained and there was difficulties around the managing behaviour, not addressing it, but I think of the NCSE's policy advice, this particular piece here is as strong a warning as anybody could give the Department of Education and Skills that there's a problem in the system. These situations could have very serious consequences for student and staff. Now, we have to remember that it does affect staff every bit. There's 3 people that these practices will significantly affect: the children who experience it, the children who witness it, and the staff that are involved in it. But, you know, there are rights issues for children. There's a host of, these are a host of human rights instruments we're signed up to in Ireland. I'm not going to go deeply into them. You can see them there. You can look at them yourself. But the rights of children, the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, they all talk about education and you know, and people's right to go about their business unfettered. Again, you know, the NCSE, they didn't look at this in isolation. I think it was indicated there that, you know, some of the supports that can be offered here are outside of the remit of educators. Child and adolescent mental health services. Like, if you're living in Cork or Kerry, there's 245 children waiting more than 12 months for access to child and adolescent mental health services. I actually have a son with autism myself, and he had significant challenging behaviour for a 6-month period at one point. He had severe anxiety and he couldn't access mental health services. As soon as he got the appropriate medication, life came back to normal, and he's been fine ever since. So access to child and adolescent mental health services. Children's disability services, chronic within the system. Like, if you live in the areas that cover the southeast, Cork and the Dublin areas, they can't even assess children on time, let alone provide them with appropriate treatments. Now, I'm just going to go quickly to the main recommendations that we would have had. Like, these are other sectors that are regulated. and where there are great supports for staff and for the people that access those services. I want to just single out mental health for a second, you know, because we speak about appropriate training for staff. The Mental Health Commission's report, annual report of 2017, they looked at restraint and seclusion in mental health services, which I might add are also accessed by children. And what they found was that where there are good numbers of highly trained staff in managing crisis situations, there was virtually no seclusion and restraint. And you're dealing with people that are very, very mentally unwell. But where there were low numbers of staff that weren't trained very well, there was very, very high numbers. But moving on to the department, this is what we believe the department need to do. They need to research the full extent of the issue because they simply don't know. There's no reporting. They need to regulate, and I'll go further than the NCSE. The NCSE say issue guidelines and so forth. We believe it should be regulated by a statutory instrument so that there's, you know, there's a bit of mandatory behaviour required, you know, around reporting. And we don't mean mandatory reporting so we can come down in a ton of bricks or come down like a ton of bricks on a school. We mean that if there's reporting and there's a school that's experiencing significant difficulties, that the appropriate professionals can go in and speak with the school and support the school, the mental health people, the disability service provision that's now coming under the wing of the NCSE, so that the appropriate supports are there for schools.
1 minute.
1 minute, yeah. Appropriate training and supervision for staff. In our report, and a lot of the research will indicate that a lot of these things begin as very minor incidents. And if you can spot the minor incident, you'll avert the big incident. I've already said speedy access to services. A good school leadership piece, you know, while we need trained staff, we also need highly trained leaders in our schools. And what they have in a lot of the other sectors is a great reduction. Ultra quick on this. If this was happening as a parent, I'd get a written report from the school about what happened, just in case it's something that's untoward, and ask your child for their own version of events. And you know, you can start from there, and like there's all the appropriate. You know, every case is highly different. Even the 14 cases we had, there was none of the two were the same. But they're the various redress options. Depending on the case, you know, it may be there's no redress option, that it's simply something that couldn't be avoided. But if it's inappropriate practice, they would be the appropriate options. And I would say, if you want a bit more detail on that, Inclusion Ireland have a fact sheet that's on our website, so you can access that at inclusionireland.ie. And thanks a million. I'm sorry for running slightly over.